Centralia, the town burning forever. Beneath the quiet hills of Pennsylvania, beneath roads that once carried laughter and morning traffic, beneath houses now swallowed by weeds and silence, a fire still burns. It has been burning for more than half a century. At first glance, Centralia looks like a town that simply faded away. Empty streets, cracked pavement, a church standing alone against the wind. But beneath this abandoned surface lies something far more unsettling. A fire that refuses to die. A slow, relentless inferno consuming the earth from below. In 1962, Centralia was an ordinary American mining town. Families lived simple lives. Children walked to school. Neighbors knew each other by name. Coal had built the town, fed it, and defined its identity for generations. No one imagined that the very ground beneath their feet was about to turn against them. It began with a small decision, a routine cleanup. Trash was burned in an old mining pit on the edge of town, something that had been done many times before. But this time, the fire found something else waiting in the darkness below. An exposed vein of anthracite coal, dry, ancient, and dangerously close to the surface. The flames slipped underground. At first, no one noticed. There was no explosion, no dramatic collapse, just a faint warmth in the soil, a strange smell drifting through the streets. But deep below, the fire spread through miles of abandoned tunnels, feeding itself endlessly, impossible to reach, impossible to suffocate. Weeks passed, then months. Cracks began to appear in the ground, smoke seeped from basements, carbon monoxide leaked silently into homes. People reported dizziness, headaches, pets collapsing without warning. The town that once felt safe now felt unpredictable, alive in the wrong way. Engineers tried to contain it. Trenches were dug, barriers built, millions of dollars were spent. Every attempt failed. The fire was simply too deep, too vast. As years passed, families began to leave. One by one, houses were condemned and torn down. Streets were closed. Entire neighborhoods vanished, leaving only cracked asphalt and overgrown lots where lives once unfolded. What remained was a place caught between existence and extinction. Today, Centralia is not quite dead, but it is no longer alive. Smoke still rises from the ground on cold mornings. The earth still breathes, and beneath the silence, the fire continues its slow, endless burn. A reminder that some disasters do not explode into history. They smolder quietly for centuries, and the ground beneath Centralia is still burning. The accident. In the winter of 1962, Centralia, Pennsylvania, was the kind of town most Americans barely noticed. Tucked into the rolling hills of Columbia County, it existed quietly between forests and coal seams, sustained by routines as old as the mines themselves. Mornings began with the rumble of trucks heading to work, the smell of coffee drifting from kitchen windows, and the distant echo of machinery buried deep underground. Life here did not change quickly. It never had. Coal had built Centralia. It carved the town out of the earth and gave generations of families their livelihoods. Even as the coal industry began to fade elsewhere, Centralia endured, small, stubborn, and proud of its place on the map. Its streets were modest, its houses unremarkable, but its people were rooted deeply, bound together by history, work, and shared hardship. No one could have imagined that the end would begin with something so ordinary. In late May of 1962, preparations were underway for Memorial Day. Like many towns at the time, Centralia maintained a landfill on the outskirts of town, an old strip mine pit used to dispose of trash. The site was unofficial, unsightly, but familiar. Over the years, the town had periodically burned the garbage to keep it from piling too high. It was routine, controlled, or so everyone believed. On May 27th, local volunteers arrived at the pit and set the trash alight, just as they had done before. Flames rose briefly, consuming paper, furniture, and debris. Smoke drifted lazily into the sky. The fire appeared harmless, contained within the pit's boundaries. No alarms were raised, no warnings issued, but beneath the surface, unseen and unconsidered, something ancient waited. The pit sat directly above a network of abandoned coal mine tunnels, some dating back to the 1800s. These tunnels, long forgotten and poorly mapped, honeycombed the ground beneath Centralia like a sleeping giant's veins. When the fire reached the porous layers below, it found a fuel source that would change everything. The flames slipped through cracks in the rock and ignited the exposed coal seam. At first, no one realized what had happened. Coal fires do not behave like ordinary fires. They burn slowly, quietly, often without visible flames. They creep through underground passages, feeding on oxygen seeping through fissures in the earth. Once ignited, they are notoriously difficult, sometimes impossible to extinguish. In the days following the burn, faint signs appeared. A wisp of smoke rising from the ground in an unexpected place. A patch of earth that felt unusually warm beneath one's feet. The scent of sulfur lingering in the air. Some residents mentioned it casually. Others dismissed it entirely. Small underground fires were not unheard of in coal country. They usually burned themselves out, but this one did not. Weeks passed. The smoke thickened. Cracks began to form in backyards and along road edges. In some areas, the ground sagged ever so slightly, as if something beneath it were hollowing out. Then came the smells. Carbon monoxide, colorless, odorless, lethal, began seeping into basements and crawl spaces. Pets grew lethargic. People complained of headaches and dizziness. Some woke in the night short of breath, disoriented, unsure why. Engineers were called in. Tests were conducted. The results were alarming. The fire had spread far beyond the landfill. It had entered the vast web of abandoned mines beneath the town and was moving freely through them, feeding on coal seams that stretched for miles. The temperature underground was rising rapidly, in some places exceeding hundreds of degrees. The realization settled in slowly, then all at once. This was not a fire that could be put out with hoses or earth. It was a fire with no clear edge, no visible heart to attack. Every attempt to smother it failed. Digging trenches only exposed new seams. Filling areas with dirt and ash merely delayed the inevitable. The town officials faced a truth they were unprepared to confront. The fire was not going away. As summer turned to fall, conditions worsened. Smoke vented from cracks in the pavement. Yellow warning signs appeared near newly opened fissures. Residents were advised to keep windows closed, even on hot days. Children were warned not to play near certain areas. Still, most people stayed. Centralia had weathered hardship before. People trusted that the government would find a solution, that the fire would be contained, that life would return to normal. But beneath their feet, the earth was changing. By winter, the ground in some areas was so warm that snow refused to settle. Steam rose into the cold air like breath from a buried beast. Trees near the affected zones began to wither. Their roots slowly cooked from below. The fire had become self-sustaining. What had started as a routine cleanup, an ordinary decision made without a second thought, had awakened something vast and uncontrollable. A mistake measured not in days or months, but in centuries. Unbeknownst to the people of Centralia, experts would later estimate that the coal beneath the town could burn for over 200 years. The disaster had no explosion, no dramatic moment to mark its beginning. There was no single second to point to and say, this is when everything changed. Instead, it crept in silently, a slow-burning catastrophe hidden beneath the soil, rewriting the fate of an entire town, one breath of toxic air at a time. And by the time the danger became undeniable, it was already far too late to stop. The escape. By the early 1970s, Centralia no longer felt like a town that was merely aging. It felt like a place being quietly erased. The fire beneath the ground had become impossible to ignore. What once seemed like a distant, manageable problem now pressed into everyday life with an unrelenting presence. It was in the air, in the soil, in the walls of people's homes. The town didn't collapse overnight. Instead, it unraveled slowly, in ways both subtle and terrifying. At first, the warnings came quietly. A strange smell drifting through a kitchen in the early morning. A persistent headache that wouldn't fade. A dog refusing to go near a particular patch of yard. Small signs that something was wrong, easy to dismiss, until they weren't. By 1979, the danger became undeniable. That year, a 12-year-old boy named Todd Domboski was playing in his grandmother's backyard when the ground suddenly gave way beneath his feet. He fell into a sinkhole that opened without warning, a gaping black pit that dropped more than 4 feet into the earth. From below, toxic gases rushed upward. Carbon monoxide filled the air. If his cousin hadn't been nearby, If she hadn't grabbed his arm in time, Todd would have vanished into the burning earth below. The hole later measured over 4 feet wide and several feet deep, venting hot, poisonous air like the breath of something alive. That moment changed everything. What had once been theoretical became undeniable. The fire was no longer an abstract threat hidden underground. It was breaking through the surface, reaching for the living. Federal and state officials were forced to act. Investigations intensified. Environmental experts measured carbon monoxide levels inside homes and found them dangerously high, sometimes lethal. In some buildings, concentrations were strong enough to cause unconsciousness within minutes. In others, methane and sulfur gases leaked steadily through basements and cracks in the ground. Maps were drawn, zones were marked, entire sections of town were deemed unsafe. For many residents, the news arrived like a slow-motion catastrophe. They were told their homes, some built by grandparents, others passed down through generations, were no longer safe to occupy. Not next year, not eventually, now. The government offered buyouts, but accepting them meant something far more painful than losing a house. It meant surrendering a way of life, a history, a sense of belonging that no compensation could replace. Some resisted. They argued that the fire could be contained, that engineers would find a solution, that the government was exaggerating the danger. Many had lived there their entire lives and refused to believe their town was truly doomed. But the signs were everywhere. Roads buckled and cracked without warning. Sections of Route 61, once the main artery through Centralia, began to warp and sink as the ground beneath it shifted. Steam rose through fissures in the asphalt, curling into the cold air like ghostly signals. In winter, snow melted in long, unnatural streaks, revealing the heat beneath. In summer, the ground radiated warmth long after sunset. Grass refused to grow in some places, while in others it grew in strange, twisted patterns. The earth itself was changing shape. Families began to leave, not all at once, but in waves. Some left quietly in the night, loading belongings into trucks and never looking back. Others held on until the last possible moment, refusing to abandon the only home they had ever known. Houses were boarded up, windows shattered by time and neglect. Entire blocks were reduced to empty lots, the foundations scraped clean as if the homes had never existed at all. Church bells fell silent. Schools closed their doors. The post office shut down. One by one, the institutions that defined Centralia vanished. Yet a small number of residents stayed. They believed the danger was exaggerated. Some distrusted the government's intentions. Others simply could not imagine life anywhere else. To them, Centralia was not just a town. It was identity, memory, belonging. They adapted to the fire. They learned which roads to avoid, which patches of ground were unstable. They sealed basements, installed ventilation systems, and lived with carbon monoxide detectors as constant companions. The invisible threat became part of daily life. But the fire did not negotiate. Throughout the 1980s and 1990s, the situation worsened. Scientists confirmed that the underground blaze could burn for centuries, fed by miles of anthracite coal veins. Extinguishing it would require removing entire mountains or flooding the mines, both impossible tasks. The town was officially condemned. One by one, residents accepted relocation offers. Their homes were demolished to prevent trespassing. Streets were erased from maps. Centralia was slowly, deliberately erased, not by explosion or catastrophe, but by policy and inevitability. By the turn of the millennium, fewer than a dozen people remained. Those who stayed lived among ruins. Their world was silent except for the wind, the occasional passing car, and the soft hiss of steam rising from cracks in the ground. At night, the glow of nearby towns flickered on the horizon, while Centralia remained dark. Yet even in near abandonment, the fire persisted. It burned through winter storms and summer droughts. It ignored fences and warning signs. It followed its own ancient logic, indifferent to human timelines. The town that once pulsed with life became a living ghost, neither fully alive nor entirely dead. Centralia was no longer just a place on a map. It became a warning, a reminder of how small human control can be when confronted with forces buried deep within the earth, a lesson written not in explosions, but in slow decay, in houses swallowed by time, in roads that crack open without warning, and beneath it all, the fire continued to burn, silent, patient, unstoppable, waiting. a living ghost town. By the early 2000s, Centralia no longer resembled a town in any conventional sense. It was something else entirely, an anomaly on the map, a place suspended between existence and erasure, where streets once echoed with conversation and engines, there was now only wind. Where front porches once held rocking chairs and children's bicycles, there were empty lots overgrown with weeds and silence thick enough to feel physical. Yet Centralia was not dead. It breathed. The land exhaled warmth through cracks in the earth. Steam rose in thin, ghost-like tendrils from fissures in the ground, especially on cold mornings. The smell of sulfur lingered in the air, faint but unmistakable. The fire still burned, deep beneath the surface, unseen but ever present. An ancient force feeding on coal laid down millions of years before human memory. From above, the town looked like a wound that refused to close. A handful of roads still cut through the area, though many ended abruptly, swallowed by earth or blocked by mounds of dirt and warning signs. Route 61, once a vital artery connecting communities, had become one of Centralia's most haunting features. Large sections of the highway had buckled and collapsed, torn apart by underground heat. Cracks split the asphalt open like jagged scars, some wide enough to swallow a person whole. Nature began reclaiming what humans abandoned. Trees sprouted through pavement. Vines crawled across abandoned foundations. Birds nested in places once filled with laughter and conversation. In the absence of people, the forest moved in quietly, patiently, reclaiming what had been taken from it decades earlier. Yet despite the silence, Centralia was not empty. A small number of residents remained, fewer than 10 by the early 2000s. They lived scattered among the ruins, occupying homes that stood isolated amid vast stretches of nothingness. Their reasons varied, but their resolve was the same. This was home. Some had been born there. Others had inherited their houses from parents who refused to leave. A few stayed out of defiance, against the government, against the idea that their lives could be erased by a bureaucratic decision. To them, leaving felt like surrender. They adapted in ways outsiders found hard to understand. They learned which paths were safe to walk and which could open into steaming voids. They knew which seasons brought higher risks, which winds carried toxic fumes, and which areas to avoid entirely. Carbon monoxide detectors became as common as light switches. Windows were sealed. Basements were monitored constantly. Life continued, but cautiously. At night, Centralia became something else entirely. With no streetlights and almost no human activity, darkness took over completely. The sky stretched wide and unobstructed, heavy with stars. On cold evenings, steam drifted through the darkness from cracks in the ground, glowing faintly in the moonlight. It was beautiful in a way that felt deeply wrong, like watching a sleeping giant breathe. Visitors began to come, drawn by curiosity and rumor. Urban explorers, photographers, thrill seekers. People searching for proof of something abandoned, cursed, or forbidden. They wandered the cracked highways, took pictures of graffiti-covered asphalt, and stood in silence where neighborhoods once stood. Some treated the place like a novelty. Others felt the weight of it immediately. Locals watched them with a mix of resignation and quiet frustration. To the remaining residents, this wasn't a tourist attraction. It was home, a home slowly being erased by forces beyond anyone's control. Over time, even official recognition of Centralia began to fade. Zip codes were revoked. Addresses disappeared from maps. The post office closed. Officially, the town ceased to exist in the eyes of the state, but the fire did not care about paperwork. Beneath the ground, it continued to burn at temperatures hot enough to melt rock, creeping through abandoned tunnels in unpredictable patterns. Experts estimated it could burn for another 200 years, longer than the town had existed at all. Attempts to extinguish it had long been abandoned. The cost was astronomical. The scale too vast. What remained was management, containment, and waiting. For the few who stayed behind, time moved differently. Seasons passed with little change. Summers brought heat and the smell of sulfur. Winters brought snow that melted in strange patches, revealing the warmth below. Every year looked much like the last, as if the town itself were caught in a loop. Occasionally, a building would be demolished for safety. Another house would vanish overnight, leaving behind nothing but a rectangle of bare ground. Each removal felt like a quiet erasure of memory. Yet even in decline, Centralia retained a strange, haunting beauty. Sunsets washed the empty streets in gold. Fog rolled through the hollows at dawn. The silence carried a weight that few places in the modern world could match. It was a silence not of peace, but of endurance. Some who visited described an overwhelming sense of unease. Others felt calm, even comforted, as if the town were exhaling centuries of grief. Centralia seemed to reflect back whatever emotions visitors carried with them. The town became a symbol of human error, of environmental consequence, of nature's patience. It stood as a reminder that not all disasters are sudden. Some unfold slowly, almost politely, until they are impossible to stop. And still, beneath it all, the fire continued. It did not rage, it did not roar, it simply endured, long after the last residents leave, long after the final building collapses, long after memory fades and maps forget. The fire will remain, burning quietly in the dark, waiting. The fire that refused to die. In the end, Centralia was not destroyed by an explosion, a flood, or a single catastrophic moment. It was undone by time, by a slow, invisible force that never announced itself, never showed mercy, and never truly stopped. Long after the last residents packed their belongings and locked their doors for the final time, the town remained. Not alive in the way towns are meant to be, but not dead either. It lingered in a strange in-between state, caught somewhere between memory and erasure. The roads are still there, though broken and scarred. The hills still rise and fall as they always have. The wind still moves through the trees. But the life that once filled this place, the laughter, the arguments, the routines of ordinary days, has vanished, leaving behind only echoes. Centralia did not end with a bang. It faded. That quiet ending is what makes it unsettling. There was no final evacuation siren, no dramatic collapse that forced the world to look. Instead, the town was slowly peeled away layer by layer. Families left, homes were torn down, street names disappeared from maps. What remained became a kind of negative space, a reminder of something that once existed but no longer does. And beneath it all, the fire continued to burn. It burns today as it did decades ago, moving through abandoned mine tunnels carved long before anyone imagined the consequences. It burns without oxygen from the surface, fed by ancient coal laid down millions of years ago. It burns without urgency, without malice, only persistence. Scientists estimate it could continue for another 200 years, longer than any human life, longer than memory itself. In that sense, Centralia became something larger than a town. It became a symbol, a warning of how small decisions can echo forward in time, how human industry, once unleashed, can outlive the people who set it in motion, how progress, when left unchecked, can carve scars into the earth that no one knows how to heal. But Centralia is not only a story of destruction, it is also a story of resilience, of people who stayed when logic said to leave, of families who refused to abandon the land that shaped them, of individuals who found meaning even as the world around them slowly disappeared. For those who lived there until the end, Centralia was not a cautionary tale. It was home. Even now, a few remain. Elderly residents who have outlived neighbors, governments, and expectations. They live quietly among the ruins, tending gardens, maintaining routines, watching seasons change. Their presence is a quiet defiance against the idea that a place can simply be erased. To walk through Centralia today is to walk through layers of time. Past and present exist simultaneously. A church foundation marks where weddings once took place. A cracked road leads nowhere. A mailbox stands without a house. Each detail whispers a story to anyone willing to listen. And beneath your feet, the earth is warm. That warmth is a reminder of what lies hidden beneath our daily lives, of forces we rarely consider until it's too late. The fire does not ask for attention. It does not demand fear. It simply burns. In many ways, Centralia mirrors the broader human story. We build, we consume, we move on. Sometimes we leave behind consequences that outlast us. Sometimes the cost of progress is paid not in a single moment, but over centuries. The town teaches a quiet lesson, that endings are not always loud. Some arrive slowly, invisibly, carried on warm air rising through cracks in the ground. And yet, even in decline, there is something hauntingly beautiful about Centralia. The silence invites reflection. The emptiness forces perspective. Standing there, one cannot help but feel small. One human among countless others, all part of a much larger story written by time, geology, and chance. Perhaps that is why Centralia continues to captivate us. Not because it is haunted by ghosts, but because it reveals how fragile permanence truly is, how easily the world we build can slip away, and how, even after we are gone, the earth continues burning, shifting, enduring. The fire beneath Centralia will likely outlive every memory of the town that once stood above it. But as long as the story is told, as long as someone remembers the streets, the homes, the lives lived there, Centralia is not entirely lost. It remains a quiet warning, a living monument, and a reminder that some fires never truly go out.
Shadows grow where the light won't go. A silent wind, it starts.